May I have your attention for a very important public service announcement? We are taking over the internet, and the United States champion of word wrestling entertainment has returned for another edition of the Pocket Locker podcast. I am your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast. And as always, good people, I am in. Airplane mode. Gang, welcome to the show. So good to see you all here. I see we've got Pragmatic Crystals in the house, and Ember's in the house, and AR is in the house, and Carrie Ann is in the house, and Dave is in the house. It's good to see you all here. Good to see you all here. Today I'm gonna be joined by the lovely Stephanie Catherine Helms, who will be with us in a moment, I'm sure. Just waiting. Oh, there she goes. She's here. All right, there we go. Hey, Steph.
Hey, Pocket Locker, how's it going tonight?
Going well. So today we are going to be talking about Christianity's most dangerous idea, and it's quite a video. So maybe we should just go ahead and jump straight into it. Although you've met Drew, we're going to be talking about genetically modified skeptic. Go ahead, get your Drew story out of the way.
I don't have much of a Drew story. Actually, I do have a bit of a Drew story. If I can, I have a picture of Drew at the Last Supper.
Oh, from the from the Last Supper pic that you guys took at a.
Yeah, I have a picture of Drew at the Last Supper, and if you'll just hold on a
I'll give you a sec.
I think I can do that. Yeah, here we go. We'll get that out of the way, and there we go.
Oh, hey, Lena. Lena's here. Sorry, Lena. Yeah, Lena.
All right, so genetically modified skeptic is all the way at the end of the table, past me and all those guys. It's like,
yeah. So he's right here. He's right here. He's right here at the end of the table. Yeah. So that was at Better 22.
Better 2022 in beautiful Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was all kinds of fun hanging out with these lovely people.
And you've got your long-haired Jesus there, and the whole gang.
The Jesus.
All right. Well, Drew came out with the video. It's called Christianity's Most Dangerous Idea and Why It Won't Die. And that's what we're going to be reviewing today. So we'll go ahead and get started here.
Especially to those like myself who were raised Christian fundamentalist, it feels like Christian superstitions like creationism hit their peak of popularity many years ago and are now on the decline. Statistically, this appears true in the case of the United States. Another Christian superstition feels ever present in today's America, though, that of a cosmic war between the forces of good and the forces of supreme evil. Belief in evil entities like the devil is declining, but still occupies the minds of a majority of Americans, even the powerful. Why haven't more Americans given up this idea? How are narratives of supreme evil invoked for political purposes? And why do I consider this Christianity's most dangerous idea? I spoke to Dr. Joseph Laycock, a professor at Texas State University and expert on American religious history, new religious movements, Satanism, and satanic panic, to explore these questions. A clarification before we begin: this video will not argue that Christianity itself is inherently dangerous, or that the ideas discussed here are representative of Christians as a whole. Many Christians share the concerns Dr. Laycock and I will express here, and we encourage the audience to think in specifics, not generalizations, when discussing issues of religious harm. With that said, let me walk you through just some of the literary foundations of Christian ideas of supreme, supernatural evil working against God's will. As we see in the Gospels, Jesus himself was an exorcist. In Mark, Matthew, and Luke, we find the story of the Gerasene demoniac. Here, Jesus comes across a man living amongst tombs, frightening the local people, howling and cutting himself with stones, and exhibiting superhuman strength sufficient to break any shackles or chains bounding him. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Jesus casts the demons out of the man and allows them to enter into a herd of about 2,000 pigs, which then stampede into the sea to their deaths. Later, in the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, he warns the believers not to partake of the meat sacrificed to other deities, effectively othering non-Christians as worshippers of evil. What do I imply then? That food sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. I imply that what they sacrifice to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be partners with demons.
All right. Steph, go ahead.
No, you dive in, Jay.
One of the things I find myself at odds with Drew about on a somewhat regular basis, and others like him, is that I think there's too much hesitancy to generalize. I do think, in a way, this sort of spiritual warfare stuff is basic Christianity, and in some sense I would even argue is fundamental to Christianity. And while you may find Christian groups or sects or churches or individuals that, like you said, share our concerns and sort of reject this type of thinking, I think it's safe to say that, or at least in my opinion, that they're doing something special with Christianity. And there's just a lot of this, and I want to start by saying, like, for me, and I sometimes oversimplify these things, but when I do, I sometimes talk about psychology versus sociology. Of course, I studied a little bit more sociology than psychology, and even more so consider myself an anthropologist, and that goes even deeper. And the difference is, I think when I think of psychology, I think I'm trying to argue, or sorry, I shouldn't say argue. I'm trying to understand the motivations and the behavior of an individual. When I'm thinking about something like sociology, I'm thinking about the behavior of groups. And when I go to anthropology, it may even be populations on a larger level than that. And so I sometimes feel like, look, Christianity it's a super huge group. There's literally millions and millions and millions of them, maybe billions. There's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different sects. And I just can't keep carving out caveats for rare cases. I think that's super interesting, but for me, I'm trying to talk more generally about Christianity, and I think it's safe to say these ideas are core to what we'd consider general Christianity.
Hey, Jay. First of all, I agree with you that the notion of spiritual warfare, broadly speaking, is common to every flavor of Christianity. The question, though, gets a little bit more complicated than that, because some visions of Christianity have different visions of what you are actually fighting for. If you have a a sect, a division of Christianity that believes it's God's will that terrible things be done to your fellow human beings. Who are they at war with? The terrible human beings that they see as terrible by virtue of the proclamations of a supernatural being? Or is it the group of Christians that say all are there is the siblinghood of man and the parenthood of God to get
Sure.
to get modern and correct about this particular more liberal vision of the religion itself. So who are those people at war with? Are those sects at war with the more fundamentalist sects? Are they at war with progressives who have no belief, or indeed other religious traditions? That's where it gets dicey to me.
Yeah,
Because you
I'd
can
agree
be
with that.
devoted to a notion of warfare, but the cause might be very different.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Because I would even say, part of the tradition that I came up with, or at least or thought I was coming up with, because I think to be honest, we have less theological conversations with our family members than we think we do, right? And it's more like we're picking it
Not
up and
if you're in a
thinking
Methodist
about.
minister's
No,
family.
not your
you
house.
don't.
Your
If you're
house is-
sitting at the Sunday dinner table, let me tell you.
But I'm talking about even in a family of pastors, right? Even in a family of ministers, but in different traditions, right? There's a
Right.
way. There's other traditions where you're not doing as much questioning as I would like. But I would say in a lot of those traditions, you think of natural evils, hurricanes, poverty, hunger, disease, right? And there's a way in which you could get behind a tradition that's going to try to fight against things like that. I think part of my issue of why it's and I think dangerous is a key word, because when we think of danger, we think of things that, like we're saying, may not always necessarily be harmful, but can be if used wrong or in the wrong context or without the proper whatevers. I think, and you talk about this when I was in college, like, you can't fight a war against drugs. You fight against a war against drug users or drug dealers or whatever. You can't fight a war against terror. You fight against a war against people you label terrorists. And I think there's like this general thing where, I don't know if it comes from this, but there's this thing where we want to go to war, and then we want to insert something that's universally understood to be bad in there, and think that we can war against that without realizing, no, wars are fought against people, and whatever you put in there, it's going to be then a matter of which people you assign to that. And so maybe that's an overall issue with like a war against evil or demonic forces, right? Is because, at some level it's going to come down, like you said, to human concerns. The other thing I want to point out is just the Jesusness of it. I think you see it. We're saying it's kind of inherent, but you see it even in the Jesus character. A lot of times when you point out something silly about the religion, you're told that's the Old Testament or that's this weird Hebrew tradition. But here we get, Jesus himself, casting demons and doing an exorcism, casting demons into pigs. And this is where I get off with a lot of people, where I think if they really understood the example of Jesus, they would understand he's kind of not a modern character in that regard.
Of course not. Of course he isn't, Peter. How many different Jesuses are there? I mean, as far as I can tell, there are as many different Christianities as there are Christians. Or there are as many Jesuses as.
Yeah, I was gonna say those all might be equivalent numbers, right?
Right.
Yeah.
This is a weird thing that I think you and I would agree that altogether too often, people will use especially the religious people will use their deity as uh, they'll use their deity as skirts to hide their bigotry behind.
Yes. Yeah.
They give the deities, oh, it's like I'm perfectly fine with, but God says here these people are going to hell, and you really I'm here out of compassion to save you from eternal damnation because you're going to hell.
Yes.
It's the whole thing about the hate the sin, love the sinner thing.
Right. Right.
And it's nonsense, because ultimately there has to be that soupçon of hate that's coming from where? It's coming from God.
Yes, that's a very good
And
point.
if
Like
you
when people
believe in
say
that
that,
God,
people don't point
the
that out when they say that there's still
patronizing
hate
nature
involved.
by which you're trying to save me from hell is terrible.
Yeah. There was one other thing I wanted to point out, which is just that in what Paul is saying here, one of the things that is really difficult for me, like with my family, they're still Christian. One of the things I'm having a hard time talking to my mom about is, for instance, is I believe Christians are a group that discriminate against non-believers. And I felt like that concern was brushed aside. Like I said, you know, you're literally part of a group that discriminates against people like me, thinks very little of non-believers. And it's something that when I look back at my time as a believer, to be honest, I was aware that we thought there was a hierarchy and a place for women where men were above that and God was above that. And I was aware of that. I was even aware um, that you know, there were problematic racial groups that used the Bible, and that race could be that religion could be used in a way that was racist. I was certainly aware that we didn't think it was okay to be LGBTQ because that was in there, and we knew that was in there. I was definitely aware of the fact that it was not okay to believe a different religion or to worship a different God. I accepted a broader spectrum of Christians than most Christians, but I could still tell you that there would even be forms of Christianity that were probably a little bit too far outside of, you know, what I could get behind. Um, and I certainly understood that God hated non-believers, or they were considered an enemy of God. But for some reason, now as a non-believer, I find it really hard to get Christians to accept that and to be honest about it, even though when I now look at it, when I look at sort of a scriptural basis of it, I think there's very little for those other prejudices, and it's very central to the Bible that you have to worship God, you have to believe in God, you're an enemy of God otherwise, and what the consequences of being an enemy of God are. And so it's weird to me that like the bias against non-believers isn't a little bit more front and centered in people's mind. And I think it's partially because it's so bad, it's considered so unforgivable that I just don't think people know what to do with it. I think it's very uncomfortable.
We probably want to get back to this take
Sure.
on Christianity's most dangerous idea, but before we do, I just want to point out, I just want to cite the parable of the Good Samaritan. When uh, a Pharisee asked for what is the law? Love thy neighbor as thyself, the most important, right? That's which we can slice and dice that thing every which way to Sunday. But the answer given was the parable of the Samaritan woman who gave Jesus drew water for Jesus from her well, and Jesus asked, "How is it that you, a Samaritan, are giving me, a Jew, something to drink?" And she basically goes, "Well, it's because you're thirsty." And the guys, and then the conclusion to the tale. I'm just sort of pulling this off the top of my head, and people will say, "That's not what the Bible says." I know it's not what it literally says, but it's basically the message of the tale. The end of the tale is, "Go and do likewise," which is to say, from that particular teaching, doesn't matter if this person's a Samaritan or a Jew. You if someone is thirsty, you give them water.
Right, right.
So, and that isn't that particular tale is frequently minimized in some of the in certainly the tradition that Drew came out of, maybe the tradition that you came out of, but in other traditions it's elevated. So this is what I mean about which demon are you referring to? Some people would have viewed the Samaritan woman as a demon because
Sure,
of
sure.
because of the Samaritan interpretation of Torah. The Samaritans, which actually still exists, there are still Samaritans in the world. Not many, but some. The Samaritans were people of the northern kingdom that had a completely different Torah, common elements to it, but not the same.
Yeah, so I
It's
think for like in the tradition I'm familiar with, I think there's there's definitely a lot of emphasis on the Good Samaritan passage. Matter of fact, it's sort of seen as a lesson to Christians about how you should be, there's Good Samaritan laws and things like that, right?
right.
But I think it's not emphasized. It's not seen as that person emphasizing that they're a non-believer. And I think it just comes down to be honest, I think just to be a religion that's successful, I don't think you can really say it's okay to not believe. I think that goes a bit beyond people's ability to interpret that, and I think that's part of it.
Yeah, that's true, and I think that goes along with what the Dalai Lama says. It doesn't matter, as long as you have a path, you'll be okay, right? So if you're following a Christian tradition, as long as you believe in supernatural woo, you're fine. Which
Yeah,
I reject, you reject,
right.
most of the people in the chat reject. It's more important to me to believe in the doing the least amount of harm to those around us as we possibly can, and work toward the well-being of one another. And you don't need a God to do that. You just need to do it. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's actually something to come back to, like the ecumenical ideas. I'd love to chat about that sometime. All right, we'll go ahead and hit play so we can get through some of this.
Even later, an author claiming to be Paul, but who New Testament scholars generally do not think was really Paul, wrote possibly the most cited verse for those who believe Christians are locked in a spiritual battle with supernatural forces of evil. For our struggle is not against blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Finally, the hugely influential 2nd century theologian and heresy hunter Tertullian wrote that all sin is demonic in origin and effect. Even otherwise, since all faults savor of opposition to God, and there is nothing which savors of opposition to God which is not assigned to demons and unclean spirits, whose property idols are, doubtless whoever commits a fault is chargeable with idolatry, for he does that which pertains to the proprietors of idols.
Hang on. Did you want to say something about that?
well, yeah, a little bit. And so and this particular, why did this become orthodoxy? It became orthodoxy because it's inherently gives authority to uh it gives authority to the emperor, right? It gives authority to the society at large. to make these, to make these judgments on people. It's just, there were these tensions in early Christianity too, and what wound up being the orthodoxy was the authoritarian strand, not the compassionate, do your own thing strand. So, in other words, the dirty fucking hippies lost the war.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. This is a great passage to pull out from Tertullian because the emphasis on all faults savor to opposition to God. Like really, and I think that that's the problem that you see in a lot of Christian traditions now, is that it's obsessive because you're in a spiritual warfare. There's just God and the things that are holy and of God, and literally everything else is evil. And I think this is where you see that type of thinking for sure.
For he does that which pertains to the proprietors
The language
of idols.
Mordor.
Given this strong textual foundation, it's understandable why so many Christians across time have seen belief in supreme supernatural evil as a natural part of their faith. Fast forward to today, and we find ourselves in a culture still battling over narratives about the satanic, demonic, and supremely evil.
Okay, pause the tape. Sumami brought in something that I think is actually, at least to me, a really good point that I don't think Drew really elaborates on. Again, gang, we're talking about complicated topics. I mean, there's so much to get into. But Sumami said, I think it's difficult for people to develop a belief in the self when they're taught from early age that the self is inherently sinful and rotten and unworthy of anything but endless torture. I think this is a really important point because what it says is that the spiritual warfare is not just external. It's an internal warfare as well, and that you're literally taught this from a young age that you yourself are evil, and if left to your own devices, right? That all that temptation that you're facing and struggling with, and every time you're losing your temper, having too much to eat, taking a bit too much pride in the good grades you got, whatever it is, like you're taught that you have your own evil nature. I also think that it's part of what keeps people in religion. I've been talking a little bit about how I think we talked about with the narcissist thing, how part of what narcissists love about religion is that it elevates them. It makes them feel morally superior and better than other people. And I think a big part of that is this struggle. It's this idea of, well, I've been tempted and I've wanted to do these things, but I'm a good Christian, so I've fought against them. I've had to deal with this inward conflict all my life. And now you're trying to tell me that's all silliness and there was really nothing at all wrong with what normal people were doing all along. And I think that's a bitter pill to swallow.
And just as this is like an aside that we could go off on a tangent all the rest of the evening on, but you talk about that spiritual struggle, that inward struggle as well as the outward struggle. You know what that is called in Arabic? You know what the word for struggle is called in Arabic? It's
the word
jihad.
Jihad. Okay,
It means struggle.
Okay.
It does not mean holy war. It means struggle, and it is meant to do exactly what you just said. It's the outward struggle to bring people to the faith, and the inward struggle to bring yourself to the faith.
Right,
and there's an iteration of that word because of the way Semitic languages work. It's called ijtihad. And ijtihad means inquiry, and it's the basis of science.
Yeah,
and the door of ijtihad in Islam was closed in the 1300s.
So a lot of Muslims,
the dirty fucking hippies lost there too.
They understand their Muslim tradition to be much more pro-science and amenable to science than Christianity, and I think that that's where you know, and I and I think
They
Jews have the same
did.
thing. Yeah.
They did up until the closing of the door of Ijtihad. I mean, if you think of Avicenna, who brought brought an awful lot of brain power to the study of medical conditions. He was a medical doctor in uh, the eastern part of Persia. We know him as Avicenna. His name was Ibn Sina, and he was he was part of that system of inquiry, and all that shit got shut down in again the 13th century in Islam. They just nope, we're just gonna go with the faith. The dirty fucking hippies lost that war too.
Before we go back, you've been mentioning a similar sort of rhetorical thing with the word related to the current, pro-Palestine movement. The word for uprising.
Intifada. That's all it means.
Intifada. Sorry, I couldn't think of it. But yeah, it's been coming up a lot, so I figured you should mention that, right? It just means resistance, right? The struggle for uprising, technically.
Uprising, right? Revolution, resistance.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
Some see this battle in more literal terms than others. For example, a man recently threw and detonated a pipe bomb at the Satanic Temple headquarters in Salem, Massachusetts.
My goodness.
Thankfully, no one was injured and he was later arrested, but his message still got through. Even those who use Satan as a symbol and don't believe he exists in literal terms still represent an enemy in a cosmic war for some. With over 30 articles published on this, we can see that the battle over supposed supreme evil is relevant to many. I found this story where I read all of my news on Ground News, a news aggregate.
The Ground News. Everybody does this. And y'all, I think Ground News is a right-leaning thing. I think they're another example of I don't know if astroturfing would be the right word, but what's this these false people things? They make you think they're on side and they're not, or they're neutral and they're really not.
I share your opinion.
Yeah, it's one of them, gang. Y'all know the type.
I see certain political figures today really using this narrative of supreme evil in order to win political favor, in order to get what they need done. And I have several tweets, several video clips of things like this where I think they serve as good jumping off points for us to discuss this subject. The first clip comes from the insanely underrated religious studies channel Religiolog. Here we see Vladimir Putin and his regime use narratives of supreme evil to get what they want done.
On Friday, November 4, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who is currently a deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, described Moscow's invasion of Ukraine as a secret conflict with Satan. He also said that Russia's task in the invasion was to stop the supreme ruler of hell, whatever name he might go by, Satan, Lucifer, or Iblis. On September 30, Vladimir Putin accused the entire Western civilization of Satanism. The suppression of freedom in the West itself has taken on the features of a religion, outright Satanism. After Putin's speech, the boogeyman of Satanism flooded the pro-government media. Western civilization today is the vanguard of Satanism. I am absolutely sure that Western civilization is paving the way for the Antichrist. Satan came out to fight with us. This is maybe the last battle against the huge Orthodox civilization. This is absolutely satanic regime. What is it, political Satanism? What are we fighting with, and how can we defeat it? This is the war of heaven against hell. This is the war of...
Go ahead, Steph.
And of course, the seat of Russian Orthodoxy is Kiev. I mean,
Oh, so
the Kievan Rus, that this
yeah.
buys into the whole notion, just like
How convenient.
yeah, it just buys into the whole an entire framing of Russian history that has Kiev as the seat of Russian Christendom. It's just, how convenient.
And that's the thing too. Like, I think there's two sides to this, if we're going to be honest. I think there's, yes, this spiritual warfare shit, dangerous idea, leads to some really bad stuff, I'm telling you. But there's also something
like
to
spirit.
the rest of us. Like this idea of, well, what are we going to do about it? I mean, Sumami brought this up, like the way in which people are outraged over, they're outraged over what's going on in the Middle East. They're outraged about what's going on in Ukraine. But we see certainly less mobilization in the streets about what things that go on in our own country. And this is one of those things, like we do see these religious factions literally going to war with each other. And we seem not to be willing to mount more of a public outcry about how we seem to still be tolerating it. It seems not to be too much yet. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and I don't think it'll come up, so it's just something to think about as we go through. There's also a way in which, when you believe that you're in spiritual warfare, you look for confirmation of that. And so for me, I would say there's that joke, you should live in interesting times, and I would say I would sign up to live in slightly less interesting times, because there's just too much going on.
I've lived in both more fascinating times and less fascinating times. Let me tell you, this is about very close to one of the most fascinating times I've lived in.
Yeah, it's just too much fascinating for me. But when we look at these things, living through a pandemic was terrible. I'm still nowhere near back to what my normal was before it, and don't know that I will. It's an ongoing struggle. Not to mention the millions of lives lost and devastated. And I remember during that time saying, I don't know, this is pretty shitty, but I think one of the only things I can imagine being worse than living through a pandemic is, of course, living through a war. And literally, we didn't even wait for the death toll or the spread of COVID to get safe. As soon as it just waned a little bit, we were like, oh, let's get right back to warring. And then we're now in this time, and there's like multiple genocides going on. You can't even keep up with them. My point is, most of us, this is horrifying. This is literally the worst imaginable thing you can live through. And I think for a lot of other people, this is confirmation about those spiritual battles. This is what they were told would happen in the end times. This is what you should expect. And some people, there's almost a certain excitement about it. There's a certain, well, I wonder if maybe this is really going to go down for real. And it's scary to think that we're dealing with people of that mindset.
It's even scarier to think that we're dealing with people of the mindset that this sort of denouement needs an accelerant.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, we've got to bring on the second coming.
Yeah,
it's just Jesus and crow, guy.
Absolutely.
You're out of your fucking mind.
Of the angelic armies. This is the war of the army of Archangel Michael against the devil, where Ukraine serves as the battlefield. I swear with the Almighty's name
Yeah,
This is the big jihad which we must all take part in, and we will not stop.
You and I have reacted to some very silly clips in the past where people invoke the narratives of the demonic, of supreme evil. And while you might be able to laugh a bit at some of those, this is deadly serious. I just wanted to get your take on people structuring power using these narratives of the demonic.
Well, it's really interesting to me that Putin is a former KGB agent, and so used to work for a regime that said religion is, the opiate of the people and it has to be suppressed. And now he's flipped completely, right? Saying, well, actually, religion is incredibly useful, right, for doing what I'm doing. So it seems to me pretty obvious that, he wants Ukraine out of just simple ambition and nationalism and to sort of reclaim a territory that belonged to the Soviet Union. But he needs a better point to sell it. And so he has said, well, we have to denazify the Ukraine. They're Nazis somehow. I think he's settled on Satanism and demons because I think that's more believable than Nazis, and it seems to be working. This language of Ukraine is a satanic country seems to have started during the 2022 midterms in the United States, and so I do think this was partly not just aimed at Russians, but this was also aimed at Americans to try to get Republicans voted into the Senate who would vote to not give any more money to help Ukraine to defend itself. The other thing that's very interesting about this video is it seems to be kind of ecumenical, right? So it says whether you call him Satan or you call him Iblis, which is the name of Satan in the Quran, and there's a reference to jihad at the end. So it does seem to be calculated to kind of create a coalition of the faithful to serve Putin's agenda. And that's one of the uses of demons, is sort of bringing people together against a common foe.
We've seen some of that in America, in Michigan, where you have a lot more Muslims there. You've seen certain Muslim groups and conservative Christian groups kind of band together against queer books in the library and school libraries, and trying to make sure that like an LGBT agenda isn't taught to their kids. Politicians here are rather prone to making arguments using the supernatural in order to have people band together. So you're saying that we may be seeing something similar, but in Russia.
Right, but these coalitions are going to be short-lived. You can't base an alliance on just hating the same group of people, right? So there was a story recently about a Ukrainian soldier who was captured, and he turned out to be an evangelical Christian. And so they brought in a Russian Orthodox priest to exorcise him, to get rid of the demon of evangelical Christianity from this soldier. So once Putin gets what he wants, all this language of it's us people of faith against the devil, that's all going to go away.
Yeah.
But for right now, it's politically useful to frame it that way.
Steph, what do you think of that statement that you can't form like a long-standing coalition based on hating the same people?
I don't think it stands for a very long time, but it stood for quite a long time in the Europe of the early modern age. The 30 Years' War is a testament to that. I mean, it's a long war, and conducted on the basis of sectarian violence between Protestants and Catholics. I think that at the speed of information these days, I think it's more likely that it can't last. That gives me hope. But it's the persistent, let's just put it this way, the persistence of religious dissension and debate has lasted as long as the human race. So I'm not sure that this sort of argumentation is ever going to go away. The question is, are we going to continue to literally kill each other over religious belief or lack thereof, to our detriment and to the detriment of the earth and progress? Because while these ideas and these little debates are nice to have around a campfire somewhere in the Judean hills, on the Judean hillside, in a world population of something in the neighborhood of 1 billion, if that, uh, of humans, they can't survive in a world of 8 billion people. Just can't without utter catastrophe.
One of the things I think is interesting is I think it's, there seems to be a similar thing going on in the Middle East, obviously, where um, people seem to be really motivated by what I can only describe as like a supernatural impulse, right? To destroy other people. Like it's really crazy. But I think you can watch in real time how ideology can dehumanize people. You can see you can like literally in real time like see a bomb drop on a really big building, knowing damn well there's a lot of people in there. See this with someone else, and then they'll start and hear them start making excuses for it, and you're like, okay, so that's how this works. So, so when you think other people represent a supreme evil, it's just, well, they have to be wiped off the earth. I mean, how else are you going to stop them? I mean, I mean, wouldn't it be easier if we just nuked the whole thing? I mean, we just laid it. You're just like, what? So it's, yeah, we're just seeing it in a lot of these conflicts. We're definitely seeing it in real time. It's very scary.
Moving on to people high up in the US using narratives like this, we're going to talk about a tweet from this guy named William Wolf. He put this out earlier this year. William Wolf was a part of the Department of Defense under Trump, and now is still politically influential, maybe not as much as he once was, but I think the fact that he's not serving in office.
Sorry, I should read that
wants...
just because there's a lot on there. He's the executive director for the Center for Baptist Leadership, former Hill staffer. So he was a Trump appointee at the state and DOD, Department of Defense. All right, there we go.
But I think the fact that he's not serving in office in the same way that he once was has made him kind of say some of the quiet parts out loud. So let's take a look at his tweet here. So it turns out William Wolf auto deletes his tweets, but luckily I have screenshots so we can still talk about this.
Okay, my response to SOTU, we need to see the deeper spiritual realities at play. This ain't just a political fight, it's a spiritual war. Heaven and hell are real, demons exist, and there are two main demons being worshipped in America right now. Number one, Molech, who demands child sacrifice, parentheses, abortion. Two, Baphomet, whose demonic goat-like representation is gender bending, LGBTQIA+. The Equality Act and reproductive rights aren't just, quote, policies that the radical left/Democrats support. They are sacraments, acts of worship to their demon gods. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against... Well, we know that quote from Ephesians. Okay, and then we get through Ephesians 6. It's time for Christians to call on America to repent of our idol worship of demons and return to the one true living God and his Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Maybe God raise up more idol smashers for our days yet. And we have a sketch of ball worship, and then we have Eliphas Levi's Baphomet there at the bottom.
In our session filming for another video.
Go ahead, Seth.
And this is where the discussion turns to particularly LGBTQIA plus people, which is a little disturbing because they're addressing that they're basically going to be talking about they're basically falling into the right-wing narrative from here on out. They're going to be in defense of LGBTQIA plus people for sure, which is admirable.
Right.
But the framing, you see, it begins with abortion, ties into the LGBTQIA plus thing, and they won the spiritual warfare managed to get women's choices women's reproductive choices and control over their own bodies overturned in the United States. So in that respect, where are we going next? And where we're going next, apparently, is gay people, trans people, etc., and so forth. And this is where this discussion turns its focus. And it's admirable that these two folks are speaking out in defense of those at the tip of the spear. But in a certain sense, it's highlighting that this is the front line. And to me, it's how do we fight back at this point? Because to me, it's not spiritual warfare. It's actual warfare. It's actual warfare against actual people who are at risk of losing their liberty, losing their freedom, and losing their lives, losing the ability to live their lives as themselves. So yeah. This is the part of the thing. And how far are we into the stream? Like, we're right at the beginning. We're in the first third of the stream. The rest of it is going to be focused on this issue, which again, it makes me nervous anyway. I thought this is where it started to get weird.
But I definitely want to people definitely be able to tell that the focus is shifted. One thing I will say is this is sort of one of the reasons I really think people need to be put to task on religion, is because at some level, I think that guy's on to something when he says demons are real, evil is real. Yes. You got to make a decision about how you feel about that.
That's my point. Yeah. Exactly.
And then there's such a broad umbrella of things that spring forth from what you really think. And I think if people don't go ahead.
Because when he says demons are real, in the guy who said demons are real and we got to fight them, I'm a demon in his eyes.
Yes.
So it's not now that othering has begun. And the finger is pointed at me.
Yeah,
and at which point it's no longer a question of fighting an imaginary foe.
Exactly,
it's fighting a real foe.
Yeah,
because he sees me as some sort of imaginary thing instead of an actual person.
Yeah, and I definitely would say I care more about that than I do about a person's comfort with these sort of supernatural ideas. I need to get like right down to the thing here, and it's like, do you see what's going on? Do you see what's happening here? And if you do, then you ought to stop playing around with these people, in my opinion. Because feeding that's no good. But yeah, let's hear how this conversation goes.
So we actually heard a friar talking about how abortion is a religious sacrament for the other side. But here you have somebody that's actually in real political power. The Department of Defense is doing real work, literally working with physical might. This guy doesn't have the launch codes or something like that, but close enough to it that it gets me concerned when he's talking about an entire group of people in the US actually worshiping demons when they're, doing something like getting healthcare or just existing as a transgender person. What are you seeing here?
Well, it's interesting because he says the main deity is Molech, but that wasn't even in the top 5 for our friar. So which way is it? One of these people is clearly wrong. I think that the military does tend to lend itself to these kinds of worldviews, and I'm not in the military. Maybe it's partly just the business of killing people, of killing other human beings, leads to certain kinds of patterns of thinking. But I don't think the United States has ever had a war that wasn't a holy war. Every war we've ever fought, we've said this is for all the marbles against a totally evil force, right? It's never sort of a disagreement about resources or pieces of paper or something like that. It's always framed as a holy war. The other thing in my field of new religious movement studies is we've looked for factors.
Not so much, Steph?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the American War for Independence wasn't necessarily a holy war, and I really don't think the Civil War was a holy war. The Civil War was about preserving the Union. Yeah, it had the element of slavery is evil, but not everybody in the North that fought on the Union side thought slavery was evil. I mean, a lot did, yeah. And slavery was the central political matter that caused the dissolution of the Union. But even the president at the time, Abraham Lincoln, he didn't want to free the slaves. He didn't. The Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves in the South, in the states that were in rebellion. It didn't affect slaves held in Maryland. It didn't affect slaves held in slave states that were fighting on the Union side. So, holy war, not quite. I mean, I think the closest thing, in every war, of course, there is the othering of the opposition, and to a greater or lesser degree. Like, World War I, the bestial Hun, World War II, the Nazis. I would say in World War I, it wasn't really as ideological. It was a war it was an imperial project. World War II was legit ideological. Fascism is worth fighting against.
What I find interesting is that treating others like an existential threat makes you, in some sense, an existential threat to others. I think that's what's so scary about this is you really, like we're saying, I think you got to dehumanize another person to some extent to go to war with them.
To kill them, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the extent and scale.
We did that, the indoctrination was like, that's what basic training is all about, to get young men comfortable with killing other young men. That's what it's all about.
Scary.
To explain events like Waco, right? What went so wrong with Waco or with the People's Temple and things like this? And there's a lot of factors, but one of them has been that there is a dualistic worldview with all of these movements. They see the world in terms of people who are purely good and people who are purely evil, usually based on their interpretation of the Bible. And then some sociologists even use the term exemplary dualism. So not only are there these cosmic forces of good and evil, but those people over there personify those forces, right? So part of what happened in Waco was when the ATF made this foolish decision to arrive heavily armed with black Kevlar to a group of people who saw themselves as destined to fight against the forces of evil in the Battle of Armageddon. They didn't see them as just normal officers there to serve a warrant. They saw them as these exemplary forces of evil. And so I see a very similar move there in that tweet. If you disagree with me, it's not a simple disagreement. You're actually on the wrong side of a cosmic war.
Yeah, I mean, how much easier is it to mobilize people against your political enemies when you can use narratives like, in Ukraine, there's Satanism. It's all Satanists. We have to go exterminate the Satanists. Or abortion is terrible because it's actually child sacrifice to this evil deity that's trying to take over the minds of our children and the minds of American citizens, right?
And this is what David Frankfurter said about his book, Evil Incarnate.
He says, particularly on Waco, is James Tabor was a consultant to the FBI and the ATF who tried to bring some knowledge as to how to deal with Koresh, and that whole thing, and he's got a whole bunch of stuff on his channel, James Tabor, does about the negotiations and how things went terribly wrong.
Oh, definitely something to check out.
Yeah.
Evil with a capital E is a discourse, and it's ultimately a form of intellectual laziness, right? I don't want to tell you what my reasons are for opposing abortion or for why I think we have to spend blood and treasure to take over Ukraine. It's just evil. So stop asking me these questions.
Right. Now, in your latest book, The Exorcist Effect, you talk about QAnon, and I want to read this quote. You say, QAnon, an online movement of right-wing conspiracy theorists, has accused numerous politicians and celebrities of torturing children. The rise of QAnon suggests that satanic panic is even more of a threat to democracy and public safety today than in the 1980s.
Yeah, Carrie Ann, it's a good question. I think a lot of it has to do with a world becoming dominated by patriarchy and conquest, and sort of the need to get that into the ideology and the ethos of the people. But that's that's a big, huge, overarching question. Although it's an important one in the sense of which came first, the chicken or the egg. It certainly suggests that a lot of the problematic prejudices were in place prior to the founding of the religions. And I largely think that's the case. Like in my heart of hearts, I believe that misogyny and racism and bigotry predate They predate all these religions that we're dealing with now. Yeah.
You've written extensively about the Satanic Panic in the 1980s, and I've read all of that work at this point. That seems like a big claim. Why do you think that something like QAnon is more politically dangerous to democracy than that was?
Well, during the Satanic Panic, there were a lot of innocent people who were hurt, but they tended to mostly be, figures like the West Memphis Three, right? Teenagers who were wearing black T-shirts and things like that. But it was preying on kind of misfits and things like that. You couldn't get something like a January 6th out of the kind of claims going on in the 80s. So this is kind of accelerated to the place where people are willing to engage in domestic terrorism. That's really the difference. Even before January 6th, there was a QAnon person who I think took over the Hoover Dam or something like that, and was so people were not willing to resort to these kinds of things. There was even before QAnon, you had a Pizzagate where somebody went into a pizza parlor with an assault style rifle. Nothing like that happened during the Satanic Panic. So I do think we're seeing an escalation, and also that this is being kind of weaponized politically. I think in the 80s, the Satanic Panic came about through kind of irresponsible media, but I don't think there was anyone sort of intentionally throwing gasoline on this for political purposes. Today, that's not true. I think we have people like Putin, and I think we have even people affiliated with the Trump administration who want Satanic Panic, who want QAnon to be more of a social force than it already is.
Yeah, certain political pundits are very popular today, kind of just hand-waving all of their critics and political opposition away by saying that, you are just satanic. Anything that disagrees with me is satanic. I think a really good example of this kind of hand-waving from political pundits comes from this article that I found that Matt Walsh wrote for the Blaze media before he joined a Daily Wire. Now, this quote that I found of his comes from an article where he's talking about someone who is engaging in this kind of transracialism discourse. He, opines that this is ridiculous and that liberalism makes you crazy. And
what'd you say?
Rachel Dolezal.
Oh, this moron. Yeah.
If you can be trans, then like transgender, then you can obviously be transracial, and conflating these categories, things like this. What really caught my attention in this article, though, is him saying that liberalism is Satanism, literally. So I'll read this. Liberalism is not some quirky new invention that came along in sincerity with good ideas and bad ideas to try to help our society progress. No, it is not new. It is not concerned with progress, and it has no good ideas at all. It is the worst and most ancient of ideas, now slightly updated and with hashtags.
And I got to say that this is very interesting to me too, because I think a lot of people buy into this, even people who are on the left, people who are Democrats. It's what stops people, right? Like for instance, they know our healthcare system is, but they stop short of really pushing for universal healthcare because it's too like socialist, or it's too much like communist, right? And there's all these ideas, and they really do. I think there's still this idea that like the right may be pretty rough, but don't go too far progressive or too far to the left, because that's bad too. And I don't even understand where it comes from, other than literally just like propaganda that people came up with to condition them that these were actually evil ideas. Like socialism's actually evil, like something like the world won't survive. It's wild. That's too close to Revelations. Yeah, these people are wild.
Liberalism, which is really just a political label for the religious belief in the supremacy of the self, was born before time with Satan's rebellion against God.
Wild.
I believe it says non serviam.
No,
I will not
wasn't.
serve. Yeah, that's supposedly what Satan said to God.
Non serviam, as the tradition goes. Satan refused to worship God, who is the only truth, and chose instead to serve himself. He turned his gaze away from the light of what is real and into the darkness of his own selfishness. Whereas any human fights against the urge to treat himself as if he is greater than God, liberalism professes that the self actually is greater than God. Hence, the individual can alter his biological makeup if it will fulfill his desires, obviously talking about something like being trans, or redefine the purpose of marriage if it will make him happy, or strip the humanity from a child in the womb if it will make sex more fun and convenient. This is literally Satanism. What's your take there?
Well, I mean, it seems there's some real cognitive dissonance here, because he seems to be going against very core ideas that America was founded on, right? Like individual rights, or the rights of the pursuit of happiness, right? We could play this game, and we could argue there's an even more ancient evil view of the world, which is that human lives don't matter and you should honor your tyrants, right? Because that's the way the world is, right? There were plenty of examples from the ancient Near East of rulers who were considered to be God or to speak for the gods, and speaking against them or questioning their agenda in any way was heretical. If that's, I guess, what he would like to go back to. But yeah,
M-Carp, I think you're right, but I find with at least the sort of Christianity that we have in America that it's necessary. I think what happens is, for people, like it's sort of like the idea of hell is more important to keeping people in the faith than the idea of heaven. There's just something like whatever, when you just have the positive. Oh, there's just some all-loving God. Okay. It just gets kind of boring. There's something about that negative motivation that's what really gets people up, that fight against supreme evil. It turns their lives into a supreme adventure. Like if it was really just about bonding with Jesus, building a relationship with God, like, fighting against evil, like that's worth, like I said, that's worth going to bed early and getting up early. It's energizing.
Right. And that's the hiding behind God's skirts to in order to express your own bigotries. It's just, come on. You can be like some atheists who are right out front with their bigotries, but they're not hiding behind God's skirts. They're hiding behind something else.
Okay, here's a great thing to Steph's point. So Lena said, and there they go pretending abortion is just a form of birth control. Certainly. The thing that's annoying about this, though, is birth control would prevent a great number of these cases. And of course, they're against birth control too, because in reality, they're against sex. Period.
Particularly against women having sex.
Yeah, or at least outside of their
without male control.
Yeah, exactly. Without that certain particular
barefoot
context.
pregnant chained to the stove is basically the
And that's
contrary.
that's something that happens when we get too lost in the anti-woke and all the LGBTQ stuff, is we forget that these people want to make us have to go, get our 2 forms of valid ID before we can watch porn. I'm not, I'm not with that. If we can even watch porn, they're probably going to outlaw it. These people, they came for abortions, but they're coming for birth control or maybe plan B next, right? You don't know what right they're going to take away next. And it's important to remember that they're against everything, right? Literally anything that's not of God is evil.
All of this seems to be rather childish theology in service of reducing very complicated issues. I would admit these are complicated issues. To simply, it's either good or evil.
Cheers,
right? You're either on our team or the other one.
Yeah, I've brought up in videos specifically surrounding Matt Walsh that, he'll argue against something like people being able to access the ability to take hormones for gender transition. And I'm not talking about someone being 8 years old doing this. That doesn't happen. That's not how this works. I'm talking about adults making these decisions for themselves. He has these arguments against this, these medical arguments, these moral arguments. And there are people that, even watch secular atheist videos, kind of like mine, that will be convinced by these. And then I've come out and said, you guys know that's not the basis for this. The basis for these ideas seems to be theological. And if you look at Matt Walsh's career, primarily being kind of an evangelist for a specific type of fundamentalist Catholicism, I suppose, you see that these are theologically based ideas. He thinks that being trans is satanic. He thinks that abortion is satanic. He thinks that if you don't agree with him, you are worshiping the devil. And that's kind of the bottom line. I've said that I've been said to straw man the guy when I point that out. But I just don't know that when he says the most important thing here is that you're serving the devil, you're worshiping the devil, that you're committing some kind of supremely evil act. Why is it not acceptable for me to bring that up and say, look, we're playing silly theological games, and then we're putting all of these philosophical arguments or these evidential arguments on top of that. Let's play the silly theological game for a second.
All right, so let me just clear that up. He says we're playing some silly theological game, and we're putting the philosophy and the blase and the flavonoids on top of that. Let's just jump down here and play the silly theological game. All right, Steph, what do you want to say? And then I actually have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, well, that's where it gets, Matt Walsh. It's like when Matt Walsh says transgenderism, as Matt would probably put it, is demonic. That means that I'm a demon to Matt. So this is where the stochastic terror begins, because the more people believe that trans people are literal demons, the more vulnerable we become. And the fact that we're dealing with this on a daily basis and watching the outcomes, not in the church, but in state legislatures and on the streets, it's like, this is where it's pernicious. This is where it really matters, because it's all kinds of academic to have to have these back and forths about, isn't that a ridiculous idea? Well, it's a ridiculous idea that has real world consequences for the people that are identified as demons. It takes away my agency. It takes away the seriousness with which, or any kind of authority from anything I say. It takes away, my physical safety. It takes away my ability to go to the bathroom in public. It takes away a lot of things, and they're getting enshrined into law. So for me, it's not an academic discussion. For me, it's, it's no longer spiritual warfare. It's just plain warfare that seeks to eliminate me and mine from society entirely.
Yeah, I also feel like I like that he's putting layers here, but there's just not enough of them. So he's saying there's this theological, religious stuff you want to do, and then you want to put all this philosophical stuff on top of that. And that kind of reminds me of him kind of almost accurately saying the well, now what, or the then what, right? So, okay, I'll concede your stupid philosophical argument, then what?
Right.
Okay, then we're going to get to some philosophical, religious, theological thing underneath. But the reality is I need you to do the then what, because then we're going to get down here to the human issues, the who you're really against, what your God really commands us to do. And that's what we want to get. So it's part of the way there to get past the philosophy and the argument and realize there's a theological thing underneath. But if you really want to get to this warfare thing, you got to take the next step.
You got to take the next step, and that's what Captive Desk Dave was saying. In another discussion we were having. Okay, I concede you all of this stuff. Then what? Then what? Then what? Get to the end.
Yeah.
Because you can abstract all you want, but at the end there are real, honest to God, physical consequences. At which point it no longer is spiritual warfare. But again, if you call it spiritual warfare, you're hiding behind God's skirt to justify the warring out against people and abstracting it in your own mind. To say you're doing it in the name of Jesus, you're doing it in the name of you're doing it in the name of something, some other agency besides your own, when the person that you're doing it to is seeing it as you're doing it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, how do you feel watching these guys have this conversation? And the reason I ask about them is because ostensibly, most of what they said is agreeable. It's not too objectionable. They don't seem to be coming from a place of being harmful or trying to do harm. And for me, like, I get that. I get these, like, both. I get this feeling that's like, don't have conversations about us without us. On the other hand, I have this kind of envy in the sense of, like, at least they're willing to try when it comes to these issues. I don't even see them trying when it comes to issues of, like, racism and things like that. And I'm like, I wish they'd get a little bit more practice, because we're not always going to be able to be there. And so you need to exercise it a little bit yourself. I don't know.
If the subject of DEI comes up, or the subject of Black Lives Matter comes up, or something like that, you'd see the same sort of thing. But the thing, it's the about us without us thing. To me, in this particular conversation, which happens to be focusing on the demonization of trans and LGBTQIA plus people, it's like, I think what is often missed, and again, I've been hammering the point quite a bit, is the abstraction that is involved. That the then what is often left out of the conversation because the people aren't considered. And the point at which that stochastic terror becomes real terroristic acts, or the warfare is actually carried out, whether the warfare is in the way of politics, which of course von Clausewitz said, war is politics by other means, and so politics is a form of warfare, right? It's like, and when the politics comes home to roost in places like Texas or Florida or Oklahoma or Idaho or Utah, for people like me or for women generally, women like myself, women who are cis, we're screwed. We're just thrown under the bus, and nobody seems to give a shit.
Yeah. So
It's just it's this admixture of misogyny and transmisogyny, because it's usually all of the. Let's be honest, most of these discussions are focused on trans women, and there's no fucking coincidence there. It's that element in this conversation that I find somewhat lacking, and not to take away, again, as I said at the outset, not to take away from the earnest desire for both of these fellows to fight the good fight and be good allies. It's that I keep listening, and I don't hear that sense of urgency that really should exist.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference, right? Is who has the argument and can kind of just leave it there, versus, how much are you impacted by it on a personal basis, and in reality, we need more than that, because our solidarity can't depend on our numbers. It's like, I'm never going to be able to experience what another person experiences, but I need to get to the point where their experience motivates me enough to treat it as though it were my own problem, as though it were my own experience. Because otherwise, this is why minorities are always going to be screwed. Yeah.
Intersectionality is a real thing. And it's very very curious that very frequently women's rights, women's reproductive rights, women's rights generally are treated as if they're minority rights, when women are over half the fucking population. I mean,
that's very true,
people.
That's very true.
Just in the language and the thought processes where our culture is trained to think of these issues as being minority issues, when in fact you're talking about disenfranchising more than half of the people in society.
Yeah, and in some academic spaces, we've started to use terms like historically excluded populations, because it avoids
better.
It's a little bit better in some cases. Yeah.
Like you said, you can easily play it to the advantage of somebody who has different priors when it comes to their theology, right?
Well, right, and he's saying, well, your God gave you your body, and so you can't question it, but presumably God gave you lots of other things too, like your drives and your ability to advance in medicine and technology, and your ability to fight for your own autonomy and so forth. So he becomes the arbiter of sort of which parts of you are from God and which parts of you are sort of aberrations. And you could argue that is playing God.
Yeah.
Right. And at least people who are trans or want to kind of explore those issues, at least they're doing that with their own lives and their own bodies. He's taking that on and applying it to other people.
Right, exactly. Which is what he then tends to accuse trans people of doing. You're not trying to just get it for yourself. The reason why you, transgender elementary school teacher, are transgender in an elementary school is obviously not because you want to provide educational opportunities or just educate, the general public like a cis person would do. You're doing this because you want to influence children to be trans, and you want them to get hormones, and you want them to get surgeries and all of these things. And that's wrong. You shouldn't influence people morally like that. Meanwhile, by the way, you're worshiping Satan if you don't agree with everything that I say and do everything that I say.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're in the business of sort of remaking society in your own image, you would naturally assume that is why you want access to children, right?
Right.
Is as part of that project. I mean, one thing that came up with the Exorcist effect is we wrote a whole chapter on Malachi Martin, who wrote this ridiculous book in 1976 called Hostage to the Devil, which was presented as a true story. But in 1976, one of the stories that he made up is about this demon called the Girl Fixer, and it's basically the demon of transgenderism. And this person is possessed, and they go through gender reassignment surgery, and then there's this orgy involving all these Satanists, which inexplicably has a cold buffet, I guess, to get your calories, back up after your orgying. But this was presented as a true story. And I think what it shows is this idea of there is something utterly demonic about transgenderism. This is not a recent thing, right? This is something that goes back at least to the 1970s.
Next, we're going to continue.
So one thing, go ahead, Steph.
So I want to point out something that I remember listening to this portion of the video and being a little bit appalled. You see, what happened there is Drew made oblique reference to children getting surgeries and hormones and all of this other stuff without saying that doesn't happen.
He did when he mentioned the example of, like, he said an 8-year-old or so he constructed an example earlier and said it didn't happen, but not this time. Yeah.
But it's really
and
important.
That's a huge
It's really important to point out it's bullshit.
Absolutely.
If you're going to repeat the nonsense that Matt Walsh says, or that Ben Shapiro says, or that any of these, or whoever the dingbat, the CPAC guy says, you're going to point out any of these things, you got to tell them. You got to tell your audience it's crap.
Yeah,
it's
we
bullshit.
had this. You and I had this conversation, I think, actually, because I was trying to tell you I'm in favor of the surgeries because I'm in favor of the trans kids, and two, I think people need to have every medical option on the table, and it's not my place to take it away. And you were saying you got to keep telling them it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. It doesn't. It doesn't matter. It's just it's not happening. It's not a thing. So it was sort of like And
the reason I say that is because you will get people coming back at you and says, well, what about Jazz Jennings? What about this person? What about that person? And it's like, well, in this circumstance, I think Jazz was a month before her 18th birthday, and she had gone through her entire childhood with through the entire process of dealing with healthcare professionals and working through this whole thing. And again, these things are individualized to a huge degree, and they are, they're just individual they're individual decisions that are made by individuals and their parents and their medical team. So it's the standards of care are actually I referenced the WPATH standards of care on the transpositions in the transpositions Discord. We have a whole section of peer-reviewed and graded studies that are available there. But the point is, Matt Walsh doesn't care about that. They don't care about the facts. They don't care about the studies. They don't care about how long these issues have been studied. It's always comes down to, well, I think it's icky, and what about this anecdote? And very frequently the anecdotes are bullshit themselves. So
yeah. Thanks for sure.
Continue on this theme of people saying that LGBT communities, movements, individuals are in some way satanic. So this is a clip from the Lila Rose podcast. We've discussed this podcast a little bit in another video. It's a Catholic podcast, and she is speaking to her guest, Kim Zember, who is one of the co-founders of the Rainbow Revival, which is, it's an ex-gay movement. They have things like parades and rallies and things like this, where they're basically having a bunch of ex-gay or formerly gay people who have found new identities in Christ and have supposedly left behind either their attraction altogether or just their engagement in that lifestyle. So let's hear what she has to say when she's discussing the symbolism of Pride versus Rainbow Revival.
So Rainbow Revival, we do use the rainbow. We use the 7-colored rainbow, not 6. So the LGBT community will use 6 colors, and we won't unpack all that, but we can kind of see what 6 sometimes symbolizes, right, in Scripture.
So
what color was taken out?
I think it was indigo.
Are you using the Adobe color gamut,
so
or
what you said earlier was so
Jesus Christ.
They
interesting about
corrupted
just
the rainbow.
it's like overt spiritual symbolism at play here, even just between Rainbow Revival and the Pride movement. You know, you mentioned the flag on the Pride movement. They've removed one of the 7 colors, so there's only 6, and the connotation of the number 6. And then Rainbow Revival has the full flag.
6 being the fall of man.
And 6 being the fall of man. And the flag represents God's promise to not destroy the world for its sin. And then, you know, the flood, Noah's flood. And then in addition, the word pride. You know, pride, the 7 deadly sins, and pride cometh before the fall. But your message is have pride in the glory of God, not in your own. What do you think about all of that?
Wait. Didn't you say you went with 7 colors in your rainbow? Aren't they the 7 deadly sins?
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
It's like just making shit up here.
Just
I mean, what
making
the
shit
hell?
up.
It's like, we were talking about this earlier, Jay, before we started the stream. It's like, this is semiotics. It's like we're talking literally, you know, we're talking about symbolism in words, symbolism in flags. It's just, for fuck's sake, you know, it's like, well, obviously the LGBTQ, or may I say, no, you can't. They thought up 6 colors in order to be demonic.
You know,
So
and there's
we put in 7 in order to be not demonic, except there are 7 deadly sins. So are we demonic? Are we the baddies?
yeah,
You know,
6
Jesus.
6 is the bad number when they want it to be, and then 7's good except for when it's not. They don't know. It's also it's easy to read this as silly because, well, it's silly. But at the same time, there's, you know, language matters, and this very much feels like them trying to colonize, or maybe they'd say repatriate the language, right? And to take that, I want to take pride from you. I want to take your flag from you. I think they're so bad they need to be rebranded, and this is an instinct of this movement that I think needs to be seriously checked. Also, let me just be clear. One of the simplest ways to get a professional setup for your podcast is to just put a solid color curtain behind you using a room divider, and set up in front of it. It's a classic. It works almost every time. Actually, my previous setup was like that a lot with a black curtain. I'd probably go back to it. I really like it. But you gotta know the Joe Rogan aesthetic when you see it. You gotta know when somebody's setup was copy pasta from Joe Rogan. And this is absolutely the Joe Rogan podcast setup, right? Joe's is just the crimson red color.
Even obvious symbolism, I feel.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, we're in a spiritual battle. And whether we want to admit it or not, It's like, you can stand in the middle of a tornado and be like, I'm not in a tornado. Well, you are, and you're going to unfortunately find out
And
the
you're
hard
about
way.
to hit your head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There goes the cow. You know what I mean? So to me, we are in a spiritual battle. I know many people don't believe that. And I'm like, just look around. Okay. Just look around at what's happening in the world. We are. And so to me, it just shows. And that's where I think we have to be careful, because a lot of times we will now point the finger at the person and forget that what scripture says, that this is a battle not between flesh and blood, but between spirit and principality, right? And so we have to remember the enemy is not the person in front of us. The person might be operating in the enemy, the work of the enemy, but they're not our enemy. That person was still created by God, and God wants them. Whether or not they're going to give their
And
life
that's
to
the
God
bullshit.
is not my job, but did I display the goodness of God, how much he wants them to turn from our ways, to trust God, right? And so in that, I see the parallels for sure. And we didn't create the 7 colored flag. So it's like, this was already in existence. We just, that's the flag we're going to
in
wave.
the sky.
It's you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you can't deny that. And so for me, I think it's a great opportunity though, where people are like, some people within the LGBT community, they don't even know. Like, whoa, I thought there was always 6 colors in the rainbow.
Oh my god.
Just a great conversation piece. We need to start talking.
Just
Does that
so-
strike you as a bit of a reach, like it does me?
I mean, that's just bizarre. So I guess she's saying if you make a rainbow flag with 6 colors, she didn't quite come out and say it, but that's satanic because of this one verse in Revelation about 666 will be the number of the beast,
Yeah.
right? So I guess for her, I think it's Isaiah where there's a cherubim with 6 wings. That would be a satanic cherubim. I mean, this is so dumb. The other thing that struck me is she says, well, there's this verse, Ephesians 6, and we're not fighting against people, we're fighting against principalities. But you never take a shot at the invisible forces that you imagine to exist. You only attack their human proxies,
Yeah.
right? And so this is the exemplary dualism again. And, she can.
All right, go ahead.
Caede eos, novidenem dominus qui sunt eus. Kill them all. The Lord knows those that are his own. I mean, that's basically, the Lord loves these people, but let's kill them anyway.
All right, Steph. Now we're gonna switch roles. I'm gonna listen and let you go for a little bit because I got a package here. Do you want to talk, or you want me to play? It'll just be a couple minutes.
Let it
Let it play for a few minutes.
I can ramble just to. Well,
that's
let
good.
it play
Go.
because you got to go. Just
Okay.
go.
All right.
Say, God wants these people and so on, right? But that's kind of cold comfort, right? If you're being told that, your very existence is some sort of physical manifestation of the demonic.
There you
Something
go.
that strikes
Thank
me
you.
as just so silly with this one and so conspiratorial is, so yeah, the rainbow, you could say has 6 colors. You could also say that it has 7 colors. You could also say that it has infinite colors because it's a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's a color spectrum that can be divided and broken down into however many number of colors you want. In fact, there are a lot of older paintings that are kind of Renaissance and pre-Renaissance era paintings in Christian art and tradition that they have rainbows and they're 3 colors or they're 4 colors. And that's because you can depict a rainbow with pretty much 3 or up, number of colors. So I just think it's so odd to say that is a really great
Or a color
confirmation
gamut.
that this is clearly
It's like
satanic.
you
when
can't see
the rebuttal
things
to
in
that
RGB
is
that
just
you can see
it's just so
in
easy and one that
CMYK. You
Christians
can't-
could easily make.
they
You're
don't
not
translate
doing theology here and saying
perfectly.
it's a color spectrum. What are you talking about?
Yeah, but this is very consistent with, again, David Frankfurter, what he calls the expert in evil, right? So in every culture, you get people who say, well, I know the secret signs and the secret workings of evil, right? And that could be something like, this person has a witch's nipple, so that means they're a witch, and aren't you glad that I knew that? Or it could mean, Monster Energy drink has, this secret kind of bizarre. This looks kind of like a Hebrew character, which equates with the number 6 and so forth.
Again,
But this
semiotics,
kind of thinking
signs
is
within
very
signs,
common.
Wheels within wheels.
And I don't know why we don't call people out on it more, but sort of breaking up the world into symbols and then assigning satanic meaning to all of those symbols.
I think it makes it easy to deliver a message that really,
Oh,
honestly,
hell.
it just
You never
runs
heard of a
counter to the
witch's
things that
tea?
we understand
Oh,
about
really?
human psychology and sexuality. It just, we just don't see good quality research,
Yes, the
repeatable
blemish
results of
on the
somebody going
female
through some kind of
form
intervention
was
and not
often
being gay
considered to be
anymore.
the witch's
And we
tit.
have so many instances where
They
people ran
examined
things like
that for that
Exodus
in
International,
Salem when they
where
were.
it was this big ex-gay kind of semi-deliverance, semi-conversion therapy ministry. It was run by somebody who was, who had struggled with same-sex desires or was formerly gay, and came out after decades of running the organization as, I'm gay. I've accepted that. I realized that no matter how close I get to God, no matter how much spiritual practice I do, it just doesn't stop. This is how I am inherently. That's a pretty difficult narrative to fight, especially when there are really big dramatic blow-ups of these huge organizations that you can still see ripples of today on YouTube and talk shows and all these things. To me, it just seems like another tool in the arsenal to be able to fight the fact that no, you just kind of clearly can't stop being gay if you love God hard enough. I'm sorry, it's just.
So, Steph, this is
Yeah,
kind
and
of
that's
good.
that's at the root of conversion therapy. That's at the root of it's well, and you see it in the trans context. You very often see it with organizations that are anti-trans but part of the LGBTQIA plus community
Yes.
that say, well, couldn't you just be a lesbian? Couldn't you just be a gay guy? Couldn't you just be, why do you have? Because that's not the phenomenon that trans people experience.
Right.
And again, it's just it's invalidating of the way of people's self-perception to a huge degree.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing that struck me is that, in a way, it's an example of, and I find that a lot of us do this so much, and I don't know if it's just because we love debating or love arguments so much, but recognizing that it's not about the philosophy, it's not about the arguments, and then addressing the arguments. We like, oh, well, let's talk about, well, really, that's incorrect because the rainbow could be infinite colors, and it's incorrect because that's not really what that passage of the Bible says, and it's incorrect because you can't pray the gay away. They know that. They know all that. Like, and it's that sea lining effect, right? Where they've been told this time and time and time again, and you really think they don't know that? Do you really like? It's very, to me, this was an example of how like, it's difficult even for people who recognize the issue to actually address it. And I think part of it is, especially for like, I hate to say it, if you don't experience marginalization in any other area of your life, except maybe your atheism, which people can hide fairly easily. They can stealth rather conveniently. I think it's easy to just avoid confrontation on certain issues, and you really want to like pick at the edges, and you like exhaust every other option. And I just think that sometimes makes it so people are just not as practiced at addressing an issue head on, especially if it's like conflict or it's an uncomfortable topic. I also think, and this is something I've been thinking about more and more lately, that I'm trying to get people to understand that, like, let's talk about like race, for instance. I want you to fight racism, but I want you to accept the realities of racism at the same time. There's a way in which when people do become maybe woke or aware, or they start thinking about these issues more deeply, um, there's a motivation, I think, partially to have these conversations because they want to like show that it's just a misunderstanding and people can change, and you just gotta hit them with the right arguments and give them the right evidence and all this stuff. And sometimes people spend so much effort doing that there's like, wait, we just asking you for your help over here. Like we just need you to like vote the right way or like support the right policies, like, just, down with the man, whatever we need. Like it's they're like they can't do it. And it's like, look, you just gotta like you have to understand what we've understood. There's always been this racism. They've always hated black people. So yeah, things could get better. We can make things better, but that's never stopped us, and we can't let it stop us now. And yeah, that's important to me. Like,
Yeah.
we want you to be an ally. We
Well,
want you to
I
fight with
think
us, but they're not going anywhere anytime soon.
I think it's part of that internal struggle that we're talking about. It's like, doing real self-examination as to how came you by these beliefs? How came you by this internal sense that you're that causes you to close your eyes, shut your ears when people are speaking to the injustices they've faced and their people have faced throughout the history of time, and the degree to which your where those feelings come from, if they're hostile, the degree to which those hostile beliefs were imbued in you with your mother's milk. We talk about, so often speak of the founding fathers, only one of whom, John Adams, never held a slave. Only one. So there's an awful lot of particularly among white folk, of just sheer acceptance of the rightness of the position and that whole stuff. You really kind of need to, but yet still you sit there and get nervous when you see a black person, when you pass a black person on the street. Where does that come from?
Yes.
It's be aware. That's what I love the demonization of the word woke. That's awareness. Be aware. Wow, that's
a
huge
huge part of it is both you recognize something's wrong, you have the right opinion about it, but you still have the implicit bias and also sometimes that lack of motivation to act with that knowledge. And then also and also again, just this weird acceptance of the bigotry. Like yeah, I really support my gay cousin, but I also want to make sure my bigoted uncle is comfortable at dinner too. Like, why? It's at some point, is anybody going to say anything? Because part of the reason he's still bigoted like that is because he's allowed to show up every fucking time, and there's no consequences for their behavior, and that gets a bit frustrating. But I deal with this even like in this space. I've dealt with it with this channel. Like when I first started this channel, I was just so desperate to interact with believers or someone on the right that opportunity to have it out with somebody and show them I was right, or at least show them up or something. And I still think about opportunities like that, but I did at some point choose to focus more on building community and encouraging like-minded people and getting more deep into things that we want to learn about or address or whatever. It just was a shift in focus, but I'm recognizing that, it was definitely a change in realizing I'm not getting through to those people. I'm not reaching a lot of those people. And, how many times do I want to let them spoil the fun before I just focus on, whatever we've got going on? Even like today, like there's that one person like, begging in the side chat to jump on stream. But again, like we've never seen them before. They don't have an avatar. Like I really don't want to deal with a troll or a penis bomber. And it's like, look, Steph and I actually planned something. We both took the time to watch it ahead of time and gather our thoughts and prepare what we wanted to say. And like, do I really want to ruin the stream by just having some rando come on and do something crazy? Like, not really. So I don't know, y'all. I'm just saying it's a balancing act, and it's something we deal with a lot and never quite settle on something.
It's just not really a matter of choice.
But I mean, it could be hard to refute that, right? I could say, well, I have all these issues with your statistical analysis and peer review of these studies you're citing. Or I could just say, but you're wearing a black t-shirt. And that's something that Satanists do.
Yeah.
It shows that everything that you're saying is from the other side.
Yeah. And, I want to say to people, hey, if you're LGBT and you found acceptance in, Christian communities and you feel happy and healthy with that, like that's great. That's fantastic. But I think to order your universe, like to go as far as order your universe in thinking things like, well, I was obviously influenced by demons, rather than this is just how some people are, and anybody who kind of disagrees with my Christian community is influenced by the demonic, and it's so obvious. That's a bit wild and honestly really dehumanizing of a lot of people, I think.
And I would say unbiblical too, when David tells Jonathan, your love was dearer to me than the love of women. Nobody says, well, that's a demon talking, clearly, right?
Yeah.
So all this stuff, it's very modern, and it's not biblical in the way that they think that it is.
We're going to move on to our last couple of clips here. I wanted to include this to focus on not only can you do so much with this, radicalize people to join or support a war effort, get people to believe that being LGBT is somehow supremely evil. You can point all of these things out and then continue the narrative in such a way to where the narrative becomes so completely unfalsifiable that it can't really be refuted. And anything you say to try to refute it makes you liable to be accused of being possessed yourself. This following clip is from a Christian YouTube channel. This Christian YouTuber is named Isaiah Saldivar. He is very popular in deliverance ministry circles. He's kind of a charismatic Christian and teaches people how to cast out demons on live streams all the time. And he also, I believe, is a pastor of a
Maybe
church.
I think I've seen this guy before.
A very regular preaching ministry. This couple of clips was taken from a live stream that he did talking about how to tell if you are possessed by demons or not.
And the main point I'm trying to make here is that demons love to hide. I would say 90+% of the deliverances we do, people are like, I cannot believe that's been there for years and I didn't even know it was there. So I want you to get that in your head, that demons don't just pop out and say, here I am, deal with me. The same reason why the devil doesn't pop out and say, here I am. The same reason why no one's ever got the devil doing a video interview. The devil's never popped up on the Super Bowl.
But Steph, if you're timeless, spaceless, and immaterial and you can just vanish, are we sure you're not a demon? I don't know if you're just vanishing out of thin air helps your case.
He uses celebrities, but he doesn't make himself known, even though he could, because the best thing he can do is make you believe he doesn't exist. The best thing demons can do is hide. It's a tactic called camouflage. If you don't like or you're mad that I'm exposing demons or darkness or deliverance tonight, I want you to ask yourself whose side you're on. Are you advocating that people stay in bondage? Are you mad that people are getting demons cast out, which, by the way, spoiler alert, is a sign you might have a demon? Or do you read the Bible and say, oh, does my shirt say Christ follower? That's a good shirt to wear. Or do you read the Bible and say, I'm a Christ follower and I want to do what Jesus did, period. Period. I want to do what Jesus did. All right, 11. We're going to go super quick. Get ready. Write these down. 11. Constantly challenging the word of God. That's a demonic spirit. Constantly confused about doctrine. Constantly bouncing from one doctrine to the next. Believing lies about God. Struggling to understand principles of God. Like, how could God send people to hell? And you just go down that rabbit trail. Demons want to confuse you about the word of God. Constant confusion about the word of God is a sign that you have a demon. This is one of the devil's main strategies is to get you confused about the word of God, to get you not understanding the word of God, and you're always challenging what God's word says.
So what I'm
and this is where there's no way to reason with people like that. It's very difficult for me to understand how I'm even supposed to approach a conversation with a person like that.
There is no way. I mean, it's just I hate to meet this guy on the street because I'm afraid he put his palm on my forehead and cast out the demon.
Yeah.
There's a lyric in a old Tom Waits song. If I exercise my devils, my angels might leave too.
Yes.
It's why can't we just accept the fact that humans are humans and they're different from one another, and they're you get to know their devils and their angels, metaphorically.
Yeah.
There's so much, maybe you get a little sympathy for the devil if you hang out with him enough.
I mean, honestly, I think that is where a lot of people that use satanic imagery or symbols comes from. There's sort of I know what it feels like to be outcast from the holy and the righteous and the godly, and maybe even to take issue with God and to refuse to serve. Even like when they framed it that way, he put that Latin phrase or whatever, right? And it was like refuse to serve or refuse to be a servant or something like that. I'm sitting there going, yeah, that's great. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? Like,
are you talking about Iblis?
It was
about the devil.
Yeah, it was in the little, it was like in one of the quotes, and the Christian guy got all mad that they were saying, they wouldn't serve.
It's basically the story. It's that I know the Islamic version of it. It's a story of God created man. I forget which surah it's in. I think it's in the surah Adam. When God created man, he brought the human in front of all of the angels and commanded them to do homage to his creation, and all of the angels bowed, and the phrase in the Quran is, all save Iblis, I refuse. And that's why Iblis was cast out. That's why, because he wouldn't give obeisance to God's creation. That's why he became the adversary. That's why he became he thought that nothing was worthy of worship except God himself. So he refused to give obeisance to the human that God created. Interesting story.
Yeah, and I refuse to give obeisance to God too. You think you the shit? You're not even the fart. You know what's interesting thinking about this? Why isn't there like religious traditions where farting is a demonic activity? Think about how disconnected eating and farting are. There's enough space in there for them to think that there's something else going on, right? And that like you're casting out sin. Because think about it, farts stink. They smell bad. So like why isn't, I feel like there's a missed opportunity there. I think if religion's really gonna go all the way in, you gotta tell me that what's coming out of my rear end is some demonic evil spirits and something
So what
like
you're
that.
saying is that Donald Trump is in fact the devil.
Donald, because he putting it on record in the court of law. Can y'all imagine? He said he was going to testify. Can y'all imagine if he took the stand and was like farting on the stand under oath? It was just
And then the judge puts on a gas mask.
just a Saturday.
Gets out a can of air freshener.
Yeah, the SNL skits would be endless.
Saying is
We're almost
if
done. I
you
think we're gonna make it through this
challenge
thing.
what he's saying.
Might as well.
If you doubt that demons exist, if you have any issues with theodicies, if you raise the problem of evil, those are all signs that you may have a demon. It leads me to want to ask, how could anyone possibly disagree with you and not be demonic at that point? It kind of seems like too pat an answer. Anyone who disagrees with me is just possessed.
Right. Well, the golden age of the demoniac in Europe was not the Dark Ages. It was the early modern period during the wars of religion between Protestants and Catholics, because both of them were doing this, right? My interpretation of the Bible is correct. If you disagree with me, then you work for Satan. And James Madison, when he was, helping to frame the Constitution, he said, we don't want that, right? We tried having state religions, and that's what happened. And by some estimates, 12 million people died in the wars of religion. But that's what this gets.
Want to add to this, like the English Civil War was all about that too, the overthrowing of a potentially Catholic king. Charles I. He had other problems, of course, but Charles I. The colonies were settled during his reign, during the reign of Charles I. And so it was 2 generations removed from grandfathers, great grandfathers of the people that wrote those of James Madison. That's within oral history, family memory. Right. So these guys were not, this was not a foreign concept. And the English Civil War is goddamn bloody, and a whole fucking reason that a number of English colonists came here was because of that desire to escape the sectarianism of the English Civil War. It's like those were people too. They had within family stories and the telling of family stories, the way family stories get told, a memory of this. And so we don't want to see that happen here within our polity. And so they framed the laws to avoid that. It was to make civil society separate from the establishment of religion. That's how the First Amendment got in there.
I think many of them now would not be religious. I just think living in our current times, advances in science, advances in thinking, and seeing the continued barbarity, I think they would have gone even further to make this a secular country if they were to have the Constitutional Convention in 2024. Which, by the way, we need to have another Constitutional Convention, y'all. I don't know why people think like that document needs a serious revising session, to say the very least.
That's right, is a complete inability to have a discussion about major issues, right? It's my way or the highway, and that leads pretty quickly to violence, because what else can you do? Talking is out.
I talk about things being unfalsifiable and how that makes them,
thanks for checking out both channels,
not untrue
Dave.
Necessarily, but just not useful. I talk about that a lot in my videos, but this is, I think you're right, a case where it makes it not only unfalsifiable, not useful, it makes it kind of potentially dangerous. People have killed each other over these things, and now you have pretty popular YouTubers saying these things all the way up to you have actual basically dictators of countries that have a nuclear arsenal saying these things. It makes me want to say, hey guys, maybe the demonic exists, maybe it doesn't. I don't know that that's ultimately knowable, but maybe let's meet on terms that we can agree on, rather than just saying, no, you're a witch, no, burn you, right?
Well, and I think some of the things.
I think that's and I know I know he's technically correct, and a lot of people say stuff like that. I gotta admit, I think that's weird. I think it's very weird. One, I think it's weird, especially as non-believers, to carry so much water for religious credulity. The other thing I think is weird is, I want to say, we live in a scientifically sophisticated society with the ambition that as a result we know more. And sometimes it feels like a lot of people know less because they're so far out, and like I've got to be so concerned about being accurate that it's like because I got to be honest, y'all, there's just no God. There just isn't. There just isn't. I know that. Like I'm so I don't even know why people would hold out the possibility that there is. I understand why believers do it. The other thing is, like, as a former believer especially, there's no way you walk away from your faith unless you really are like, okay, that was sitting on some bullshit. Because it means so much to you, it means so much to your family, it means so much to your identity. Like, it's one of those things you just don't walk away from unless you know you were wrong. Like, you just get to a point, you're like, oh yeah, there's just no way. So it's weird for me to hear, but like, I don't know, maybe there's demons, like, bro, there's just no demons. Like, what are you talking about? Like, there just isn't. Like, I don't know. Am I reading too much into it? I just think it's so weird to take it that far. We don't have to treat these ideas like they're credulous, at least not in my opinion. I think you get to a point where you can safely make a conclusion based on what we know. So
the other thing, Jay, just following on that a little bit, is suppose, somewhat responding to Drew here, is like, suppose they say no. Can't we just no, we're fighting demons. Then what?
Yes.
I mean, you're right.
I agree. It's a great point. That's a great point.
If they're going, no, we're fighting demons. We believe that we need to institute we need to institute canon law of some nature within these United States, and we intend to do so. Mike Johnson, somebody pointed out in the chat here.
Yes, yes.
Suppose that's the road they take, then what? What do we do with that? We can't just sort of say, well, we're not talking theoretically here. We're talking like serious shit. And in state legislatures all across the country, over half of them, there are bills either introduced restricting LGBTQIA rights or women's rights or a whole bunch of other stuff. And there are people within this movement that want to repeal the 19th Amendment. And it's like, when you get into these conversations as well, not all conservatives, and I don't care. There are enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the conversation that we had, with the atheists for liberty. It's like, you started your organization in 2020. Moms for Liberty was a thing, and you haven't filed your 990s, and I can't track down your finances. So I don't know where your money's coming from, but I think you're kind of astroturfy. And, you say you don't want to repeal the 19th Amendment, but you know what? A lot of people you hang around with do.
A lot of the people you claim that you're supporting and voting for do. And I mean, and this is a message for
what do you do as a practical matter when the people who believe that I'm a demon decide to vote me out of polite society.
Yeah, because I think that's a message for
So-called.
liberals
I don't
and
think it's very
so-called
polite.
liberal Christians, because both would receive that. No, we can't just get past that because we're fighting demons. And like, that's what I want to say to liberal Christians. Like, these people are serious. You think this is a game?
Yeah,
you
they're
think
not
it's all
fucking
for the
around.
game,
They
but
mean what they
are
say.
not fucking around. Absolutely.
Things he's saying are at odds with Christian tradition, right? He's saying, well, if you have any confusion about this, then that's demons. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I thought it was a mystery of faith.
Yeah.
I thought things like the Trinity were sort of beyond our understanding. We were meant to be confused about them. And then in traditions like Judaism, I mean, the name Israel means to wrestle with God. It is acceptable to say, well, I don't know why this is the way it is. It shouldn't be this way. It should be better. So when he's saying, you know, all these things are demonic, well, based on what evidence, right? Because I think if this is your faith tradition and you have questions and you have confusion, I actually think you're in good company.
Once again, this is a way that someone can take the pressure off of themselves, take the burden of proof off of themselves, and distract and say, no, you, all the people who disagree with me, all of my enemies are the ones who are exhibiting supreme evil. And I appreciate you joining me to talk about that. I think this is something you and I are both very concerned about and discuss it in our own ways, hoping to put a dent in this phenomenon that we're seeing today. So thanks for joining me. I hope that the viewers got something out of this discussion of a supreme evil.
Well, it's always fun to hang out and watch these crazy clips with you.
All right.
I think Drew got.
go ahead,
I think Drew got the hiding behind God's skirts part at the end there a little bit anyway.
Yeah,
I think he copped to that whole notion that
I certainly think he understands.
Here are these people
Yeah.
creating this God that they can point to and say, it ain't me. It ain't me. It's my imaginary friend who's telling me to be an asshole.
So somebody said something about, I thought all people had the same rights. One, they don't. They never have. It's pretty crazy to say that to a black person and trans person, because it will tell you flat out they just don't. They never have, and that's, that is something right. But I want to say something more important about rights. Having equal rights doesn't mean equality of correctness. Said another way, just because you have the right to believe whatever you want doesn't make whatever you want to believe right. And I find it to be the absolute lowest form of justification that you have the right to do something. It's basically like, just tell me you're wrong without telling me you're wrong. Because if you think about how life actually works, we put different perspectives, different ideas on different levels. If it comes to some principle of chemistry or science, we're going to go with the opinion of peer-reviewed expert scientists over alchemists brewing up something in the basement. In a court of law, we are going to go with the story that can be substantiated with the evidence over what people wish was the case. We do this in every area of life. So to me, like, if somebody had something to legitimize their perspective and what would make that true, they would give it to us.
Hang on, Jay. I got to address David Hiram here. I
Sure,
swear like
sure.
a sailor. I swear like a sailor. That's my job. I am a professional sailboat racer. So if I swear like a sailor.
Yeah. Also, like, I like curses. Like, people don't curse are kind of boring to me after a while. I don't know. Cursing is like seasoning. Like, I don't want my food bland. Like, I want some spice in it. If it's not spicy enough, I might send it back. I don't want it. Put some more spice in it. That's how I feel about people who talk. I just like, I know you think you sound real serious, but you just sound boring to me. Just put a little pepper in it. But yeah, like, no, seriously, like, I think people need to think about that. If that's what people are hanging your hat on, is your right to do something, it's probably a sign you need to do better. It's probably a sign you need to do better. Steph, closing thoughts or other thoughts?
You know, I think it's I always enjoy genetically modified skeptic stuff. I mean, I enjoyed hanging out with him at Better, and I always enjoy his stuff. I think he's very, very thoughtful, and he always has very, very good guests. I've minor quibbles with some of the stuff, particularly calling out the stuff. If you're gonna be addressing the bigotry, then you got to also throw in the "and that's bullshit" line somehow or another, because otherwise you're just spouting out the stuff.
Right.
But you know, I enjoyed the stream quite a bit, and I think it raised an awful lot of topics that we had some side discussion on. And everybody go give some love to Drew, and I appreciate everybody who's showing some love over here on my little stream, and of course, like and subscribe to both of us.
Yes.
And look out for us in various other venues. I'll be on Women Atheists Unload with Cynthia McDonald, and who's
at Skeptic Haven.
Skeptic Haven on Saturday afternoon, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. And David, go fuck yourself.
Yeah, we need to block David.
And so that should be fun. The topic is going to be discussing Gaza and Vietnam. So.
Oh, I think you just got some subs, Steph. That's good.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. We got rid of David. Hi, David. Bye, David. See you never. All right. Look, I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. This was fun. Thanks for being willing to do this with me, Steph.
My pleasure.
And yeah, I like Drew too. I feel like I do nitpick at him sometimes. I can only do that because he makes excellent content. It's easy to digest, and I think a lot of people see it, and so it becomes useful to, I think, get into some of the nuances and sort of like a seminar or something. Like, we're gonna have a conversation after the lecture or something like that. That's not to take anything away from the original presentation. I think he did a good job and always makes good videos, and had a real expert on to talk about satanic panic and the demonic possession and all those things. I thought was really great. And I like the fact that he was up for addressing this, what I feel is like the social issue of our time, and sort of didn't shy away from it. So definitely appreciate that. Appreciate all y'all. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, come hang out and gather.
Come hang out and gather. I was just about to say that. Yeah. We'll be hanging out there.
All right. We'll see you next time.